Bibliophiles of the internet, today I'm here to share some if you like this, read that recommendations. As I always say when I make these kinds of videos, these are by no means one-to-one comparisons. When I compare two books in this format, it's not to say that they're exactly alike in every imaginable way, but rather that they share some fundamental themes or aspects. And of course, if you closely follow my content, then some of these recommendations may not come as a surprise. The last thing I want to say is that these comparisons work both ways, so even if you've read the book I'm recommending but not the first book I mentioned, then you will most likely enjoy that other book and you should definitely look into it. With all that said, let's just get started. First up, I'm going to say if you enjoyed Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky by Kwame Imbalia, then I think you should also read Pilar Ramirez and the Escape from Zafa by Julian Randall. This actually just came out on March 1st. Julian Randall is a queer non-binary Afro-Latina poet, and this is their debut middle-grade fantasy adventure book. It's about a young Dominican-American girl named Pilar who is shooting a documentary all about how the Trujillo dictatorship has affected her family, especially her abuela, whose family mysteriously disappeared during that time. Pilar's older sister actually has a professor who studies those disappearances, and she arranges for Pilar to meet him so that she can get more research for her film. But when she enters his office, she ends up finding a folder with her missing cousin's name on it, and she ends up magically falling into the pages. She emerges in a completely different world known as Zafa, where the Dominican myths and folklore she grew up on are very much real, and she will have to go toe-to-toe with El Cuco himself if she hopes to free her prima and make it home in one piece. I recently read this book and I really enjoyed it, and while I was reading it, I couldn't stop making this comparison because I think Pilar and Tristan are such a great match. Both books are middle-grade fantasy adventure stories based on very specific cultural myths and legends, and I think both of them beautifully highlight those respective cultures in really vibrant and unforgettable ways. And they're both also doing that work of decentering whiteness and Western-centric mythologies by showing that these cultural stories and traditions are real living things, to the point where these characters are able to contend with them directly. The other big connecting factor for me is the voice. Both stories are very humorous, and they have these incredibly personable, believable young narrators whose reactions to these fantasy worlds make a lot of sense. Sometimes in middle-grade portal fantasies, the hero will naturally fit into this new world and take very quickly to the magic, and while that's true to some extent for both Pilar and Tristan, they also feel like everyday kids who are a little bit skeptical and they're not afraid to challenge these new things. They're both very inquisitive, they don't take anything at face value, they're not reserved in their judgment, and they have that quality of questioning the world as they discover more of it, which to me feels very realistic. So these are two enjoyable but also meaningful fantasy adventure stories, and you should definitely check out Pilar Ramirez if you haven't had the chance. Next up, if you enjoyed In Other Lands by Sarah Rees Brennan, then you would do well to pick up Tim Tomero and the Subterranean Heartsick Blues by H.S. Valley. This is a queer satirical YA fantasy story set in a magical school in New Zealand. It has a Maori main character named Tim, whose girlfriend cheated on him and broke up with him just days before they were supposed to partner on a very big assignment. It's a major project for their life skills class where every pair of students gets an enchanted egg child to parent, and they have to make sure their egg child stays happy and safe in order to pass. It just so happens that Tim's arch nemesis Elliot was fooling around with the person that Tim's ex-girlfriend was cheating with, and so Elliot suggests that he and Tim partner up together last minute so that they don't have to work with their exes. Tim figures that choosing Elliot is the lesser of two evils, and as they start spending more time together, they realize that they might actually make good fake parents. These books are two of my absolute favorites. I think they're both prime examples of incredible satirical fantasy, even though they're two very different stories. Interestingly, both stories have main characters who are surrounded by magic, but the main storylines themselves are not about the characters using that magic. Elliot from In Other Lands is a human surrounded by fantastical species and creatures, while Tim Tomero is a magic user in a magic school, but his narrative journey is less about magic and more about romance. I hope that makes some kind of sense, and also the fact that there's an Elliot in both of these books is pure coincidence. Anyways, the main connecting factor for me is that both of these stories center romances that are as soft as they are hilarious, and both pairings are between two complete idiots. If you enjoy enemies to lovers romance with fantastical backdrops where there isn't a single brain cell to be found with any of the romantic leads, you cannot go wrong with either of these stories. On a very different note, another interesting parallel between them is that both protagonists have really complicated emotional dynamics with their fathers, which affects how they see themselves and how they connect with other people, and that gets explored in both stories. Basically, if you want to laugh your ass off but also feel incredibly soft and vulnerable to the extreme, then you should read this book. This next one should not be a surprise because I made this unofficial comparison in one of my wrap-ups, but if you enjoyed 1500 Miles from the Sun, then you should also read Ofelia After All by Raquel Marie. This is a queer Latina coming-of-age story about a questioning Cuban-American girl named Ofelia who's a senior in high school and known for crushing on a million boys at once and being a hopeless romantic. That's what makes it so confusing when she starts crushing on a girl in her government class, which makes her rethink everything she knows about herself and her presumed straightness. She is terrified that if her friends find out, it's going to change everything, and she's just trying her best to enjoy prom and graduation and all of those end-of-the-year activities before they have to go their separate ways. As I always say, it's important to note that 1500 Miles is both a coming-of-age story and a romance, while Ofelia is a coming-of-age story about questioning and discovering sexuality in a way that doesn't really involve romance. I could write entire essays about why these books are so similar. First of all, they both center queer Latina perspectives, and they show that the intersection of queerness and Latinidad is not a monolithic experience. Another similarity is that they both take place towards the end of senior year in high school, which is a tumultuous period of uncertainty for both characters as they try to figure out where they're going next. And both stories perfectly capture that sense of desperation or anxiety or anticipation that comes from being on the brink of change. One of the biggest connecting factors for me is the friend groups. Both stories feature big, boisterous, dynamic, ride-or-die friend groups who are incredibly central to the stories, even though they're technically supporting characters. You get to know the people in these friend groups very intimately, and they act as found family for both of these main characters. They're all trying to enjoy those last carefree moments together, but they're also complicated, and their competing emotions can make for some really stressful moments. Both stories are about the main characters and their friends learning how to better love and support each other just as much as they're about the main characters learning to love themselves. Just like 1500 Miles, Ofelia is a heartfelt and heart-wrenching story about self-discovery, queerness, and Latinidad, and I think everyone should read it. I actually have two recommendations for this next book, and the first one's a little bit obvious, so bear with me, but if you liked If This Gets Out by Sophie Gonzalez and Cale Dietrich, then you should read Kiss and Tell by Adib Karam. Kiss and Tell is about a Canadian boy band of the same name, and it follows one of the members, Hunter Drake, who is openly gay and just went through a really painful and public breakup with his ex. So all of that negative media attention has put him in the spotlight, and now everyone expects him to self-correct by becoming this perfect, upstanding queer role model for young people, but Hunter feels like he doesn't even really know what that means or what that looks like. When his label picks up on the fact that he's been talking to a boy named Kaivan, who is the Persian-American drummer of Kiss and Tell's opening act, they suggest that the two of them start to date in order to generate some more positive press. I actually just finished reading this, which is why it's on my mind, but in case you couldn't tell, these are both queer boy band books. They both present some different takes on what it means to be queer in the spotlight, especially for boy banders who are put in this unique position where they're marketed towards younger audiences and primarily cishet audiences. So what happens when your demographic can't project themselves onto you romantically? When your image is all about being quote-unquote wholesome, how does queerness affect that, especially when people view sexuality as being inherently about the act of sex when it's not? I would say If This Gets Out is a little more angsty, especially because Ruben and Zach are still closeted, so to speak. One of them is questioning their identity, they're trying to figure out whether they want this relationship to be public, if it's better to keep it to themselves, and how it might change the group dynamic. Hunter, like I said, is publicly out and his band members are super supportive. He's not dating someone in his own group, so he doesn't have to worry about that, but he is still dealing with people dehumanizing him or trying to force him into this token gay boy box. So even though I would say these two stories are very different in tone and approach, they do tackle the same subject matter and ask a lot of similar questions about what it means to be a queer pop star with an incredible platform, but maybe not a lot of freedom to make your own choices. Then I'm gonna flip the script a little bit and say if you enjoyed or if you're interested in Kiss and Tell, then you should read Like a Love Song by Gabriela Martins. This story has a bisexual male love interest, so it's very much another queer pop star romance. It's about a Brazilian-American pop star named Nachi whose image takes a huge hit after her very messy, very humiliating breakup becomes public when it's broadcast on national television. After that, her team is basically scrambling to make sure her career doesn't go up in flames, and they suggest that she hires this up-and-coming indie movie star named William to be her fake boyfriend so they can generate some positive press. The two of them sign a contract and they start dating, but Nachi realizes that they might actually be falling for each other for real, and also getting to know this very genuine guy makes her realize that she might be more fake than their relationship. This book is so good, and it deserves so much more love. Just like Kiss and Tell, it's a story about celebrities fake dating for better press, which eventually becomes real dating, and like If This Gets Out, it's also asking similar questions about the pressures of being in the spotlight. While Hunter is trying to understand how his queerness intersects with his fame, for Nachi it's more about how her culture intersects with her fame, and how American centrism and Western ideals have made her stray from her Brazilian roots. Throughout her career, she's had to make these professional choices about straightening her hair or trying to erase her accent or even stopping herself from writing certain kinds of music. And this genuine connection she has with William is making her question how she can fight to be more authentic. The romance is so incredibly sweet, the social commentary is fantastic, and the story provides a great perspective on what dating looks like for celebrities. It is a truly wonderful story, and I highly recommend it. And I think lastly for today, I'm going to say if you enjoyed Jadefire Gold, then you should definitely pick up Descendant of the Crane by John Hay. Before I go on, I highly encourage you to look up more about the behind the scenes of this book because, long story short, Joan basically got screwed over by her own publisher and couldn't get the rights back to her own work. There was a really intense legal battle between them, which basically made this book go out of print for all intents and purposes, which is why I think a lot of people haven't read it. I believe it's going to be republished later this year with a different publisher and a new cover, so I hope it does finally get that reception it deserves. With that said, this is a YA historical fantasy set in a Chinese-inspired world, and it follows Princess Hasina, who never wanted to ascend the throne, but when her father is found dead, she has no choice but to take over ruling this very unstable kingdom in his place. What's more, she believes that he was actually murdered, and possibly by someone in her inner circle. Desperate to find answers, she hires a soothsayer to help, but because magic has been outlawed, this decision is treasonous. Using the information from the soothsayer, she also enlists the help of this legendary investigator who's actually a criminal himself, in a truly reckless gamble to find justice. I think even though Jadefire Gold is more of a straightforward chosen one type of fantasy adventure, I think it's also a great comparison point for this because both stories are about slighted royalty, if that makes sense. In Jadefire Gold, it's the character of Alton whose family was murdered in someone else's quest for power, which forced him to flee the palace and take up this nomadic lifestyle while he bides his time. Both stories are about navigating grief and possibly revenge while also trying to understand what it means to have power, what it means to be royalty, especially when dealing with tumultuous politics and traitors and magic. The concept of forbidden magic is also a really strong parallel between these two stories. Again, in Jadefire Gold, the other main character, An, is contending with her own extremely powerful, extremely dangerous magic, and while Princess Hasina doesn't have magic herself, they're both having to navigate a world where magic is dictated by politics. Both stories are also Chinese-inspired fantasies, and they explore deeply divided kingdoms who are vying for control and straining against deeply political conflicts. So again, with both stories featuring characters who are assuming power in those challenging circumstances, that's another thematic parallel they share. What I remember most about reading Descendant of the Crane is that it's incredibly atmospheric and transportative. It has a great element of mystery, but also it's emotional, so if you're looking for that, I definitely recommend it. I haven't read this other one myself, but I can also see some very strong parallels between this book and Six Crimson Cranes, which is another Asian-inspired YA fantasy story by Elizabeth Lim. Again, it has a lot of overlap because it's about a lone princess who doesn't want to ascend the throne, it has forbidden magic, it's about a royal protagonist who uncovers a conspiracy to take over the kingdom, so if that's a better point of reference for you, then you would also enjoy this book. So those are all the recommendations I had to share for now. If you would like to see more, of course let me know, and if you know of any similar books to the ones I brought up today, please feel free to share down below in the comments. But that's everything I have for this video today. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.